I'm Chad Bresson. I'm pastor here at the Table Church in San Benito. And how is your Wednesday? We're a little more than halfway through the work week, and I'm sure many of you are glad about that, although it probably feels for some of you like you're just now getting back to work and in the swing of things after all the holidays. I hope you're having a great new 2026. We are in the middle of the Epiphany week. I thought it'd be good for us to take some time to reflect on Epiphany this week here in our conversations at the table. There's the story in Matthew 2, basically where Epiphany comes from. Epiphany is the observance in the church calendar of the wise men visiting the child Jesus there in Bethlehem. And so we've talked a little bit about how we get a lot of those things wrong. You can check out the conversation at the table yesterday. There's a lot of myths surrounding that visit. Today, though, I'd like to look at something a little different because this showed up just in the last 24 hours in talking about what goes on there in Matthew chapter 2. One of the main characters in this story, the wise men, they follow a star, they end up in Jerusalem, and they visit Herod in Jerusalem. Herod's the king. And there's some conversation that goes on there. They try to figure out exactly where a king has been born. They say that up front. The star, they've seen this star, and they interpret the star to be the birth of a king. And nobody really knows where it's at. They get some answers, or at least some partial answers. Hey, it's probably in Bethlehem. And so the star takes them to a house in Bethlehem where they find Jesus, and they give him 3 gifts: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And that's kind of the story. The interesting thing, though, there's this character in Matthew 2. He's a main character in this particular chapter. In fact, he's just kind of sitting in the backdrop of a lot of what's going on in the 4 biographies that we have of Jesus: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. His name is Herod. Now, Herod is not a nice guy. He's pretty ruthless. He rules with a ruthless power. He is full of paranoia, and he rules through threats, and he rules through violence. We know from history that this paranoia about threats led him to exterminate his wife, his mother-in-law, and 3 sons, because he was afraid all of them were going to take away his throne. He was going to protect the throne at any cost. So when the wise men show up following the star and they say, hey, there's a king. We've heard there's a king born. Herod's thinking, yeah, there's only room for one king here. And so that becomes part of the undercurrent then of the rest of the story. The whole thing is kind of sinister. We pick that up right away the way Matthew is writing. But there's this sinister underplot as the wise men head off to find Jesus and give him gifts. And Herod's just kind of sitting there in the backdrop of that visit. There's a war going on here. Matthew wants us to see it. There's a war going on for a throne. Who's the real king here? There are 2 kings here. It's kind of funny. We sing "We 3 Kings of Orient Are," and we talk about the wise men being kings. They're not really kings. They're magi. But we 3 Kings is kind of pointing away from the other real king here other than the baby Jesus. That's Herod. There's 2 kings here. There's King Herod, and then there's that child that is in the house that is being worshipped by wise men. So I bring this up because during Epiphany yesterday, more than one place on social media, people were using the occasion for Epiphany to talk about the Herods in our culture. And they're talking about how bad a guy Herod was. And you can see this and this, and this is just against all this ruthless power. And I'm not going to give you the context because that's not where we want to go with this thing. Well, what a bad guy Herod was. And we don't want to be Herods. We want to be wise men bringing gifts to Jesus. That's how we interpret Matthew 2. And Herod was a bad guy, but when we start thinking, oh, good grief, Herod's a bad guy, we can't be like that, we got to be like this, that's not Matthew's main point. And all these text messages. My phone's been blowing up all day today. Don't know why. Must be Wednesday. Anyway, yes, Herod's wicked, but the point of Matthew 2 isn't for us to see ourselves as, okay, that's the lesson we need to learn. We need to be more like the wise men. We need to follow Jesus. Matthew's not giving us a children's lesson about being nicer than Herod. And here's what we're after here. If you follow the entire storyline of Herod throughout the biographies, all of us are Herod. Herod's all are we. That's how I usually put it. Herod's all of us. No, we're not that bad. We're not exterminating our mother-in-law. We're not trying to hang on to our thrones through violence, for the most part. But we're very good at cutting people out of our lives if we feel like we're being threatened by them and our relationships and things like that, or by their money. We're very good at power moves. We're very good at manipulating circumstances to bend our direction. We're very good at trying to control and controlling. We're very good on the need to be right. So no, it's not in the extreme headlines way that we're like Herod, but in the everyday way. Herod is all of us in the human heart. A king has been born, and immediately all of us internally are saying, not if we can help it. Not if I can help it. He's not going to be king today. And we live in an evangelicalism where we say things like that, and we're like, no, I'm not that way with Jesus. Yes, we are. Every time we sin, we're giving our finger to Jesus. We're saying, no, you're not going to be king. I'm going to do this. Every time we sin, that's what we're saying. Herod's afraid of what it would mean for him not to be king. And that's what drives us every day. We're going to make sure that we are king of our circumstances. We're going to win the conversation. We're going to make sure we're going to make sure that we're biblically right. Yeah, that's where all of this goes. And that's why we just can't point at Herod when we come to Epiphany. We can't do this. We can't shake our heads as if we're not part of this story. The Herod's always part of us. It's always grasping for the last word, always trying to manage people, always trying to keep score. That's Herod, that's us. If we were writing the real story, by the way, the real king would show up in Matthew chapter 2, but the king, even if it's Jesus, we want him riding a horse in all of his royal garments. The second king in the story is just a baby in weakness and humility and suffering even. That's our king. And by the way, that's still the way we're supposed to understand our king. Matthew gives us a child king that is small and hidden and out of the way. It's kind of funny, too. It's not just comparing two kings. Jerusalem and Bethlehem are doing this, too. Our king would be in Jerusalem, not some little place like Bethlehem. No, we're not going to have our king there. We'd have our king in Jerusalem. You see, we're all about the power. We're all about Jesus making the power moves so that we can somehow benefit from that. We're all about using Jesus for our power moves. But Jesus isn't like that. Jesus is not like Herod. Jesus lays down his life for the very people that want his throne. Us. So there's a king. There's a king. He is not anxious. In fact, he's all about love. He's all about grace. He's all about forgiveness for you. That's Epiphany. That's the other king for this Epiphany week. That's our conversation here at the table. We had a great time, by the way, at Jesus and Tacos today, and a great conversation about another story that we have about Jesus in the temple at the age of 12. I encourage you, if you've got a chance on Wednesdays, join us at noon at Blanquita's. Blanquita's is a great place, by the way. Great food, great service. Love that place. Just 1 hour, and we'll talk about these kinds of things. And we'll do it again next week on Wednesday. I also encourage you, too, if you don't have a place to be on Sunday at 10:30, join us at the table where you belong. That's what we're talking about in 2026. You belong here. And so we'd love to see you at 10:30 on Sunday. Until then, until the next time we're here, just remember this, that you are unstoppably and unconditionally and absolutely loved by Jesus. Jesus always, always